For anybody else who wants to say, Joan?
I just want to start with my deep gratitude to you, Marcia. First of all, for still being here and for your family being here and all that you do in your leadership and in your friendship. And we've been such close colleagues for some years now. And losing you was just at that moment, just out of the question. And I feel grateful for being part of this wonderful women's Seder that's coming together. And I hope that tonight, and I'm sure tonight, given who we all are, the struggle that we're in this country and throughout the world will be something that we'll take on and will continue to take on through the ages. And thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here.
We are now recording. No.
Yeah,
No.
it's
Oh,
recording.
good. Somebody did it. You did it. No, whoever the host is had to do it. Oh.
Hi, I'm Jan. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure. I'm Jan, and I just want to say a very strong, very heartfelt thank you to all of you who organized the Seder today. Marcia, to you for your spirit and your generosity and your sharing with all of us over so many years, but also that we keep this tradition going and we go with your strength and your tenacity for life and for connection to all of us. And I come with a heart full of special Nana joy, because I was able to hear my 3-year-old grandson at on a first Passover, first night of Seder, of Passover, at our Seder, say the blessing over the wine and over the meal, which he had learned in his Jewish community school. So he has a strong, lovely voice. And for a 3-year-old, he does pretty well with all of those complicated words. So we have much to be grateful for in the midst of so much tribulation and challenge. And we want to make sure that the generations that come behind us have the joy that we have experienced and do experience in community.
Thank you.
Hi.
You can go ahead.
I'm Kitty, and I share the gratitude that the group is expressing for one another, and especially for Marcia and Jenny and Ella, representing a long tradition in which we realize our strength lies in common action and shared beliefs, especially the belief in social justice and changing the world. I study this, but I don't have it in my life every day. So to have a place where we come together across a lot of difference, but with a common understanding that we are agents of change, and especially when we are together, and especially when we are recognizing the power that lies with women's actions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else here would like to?
I would.
Yes.
I'm Rochelle, probably the only person here with a concussion today. And I couldn't not come. I'm just so grateful for knowing Marcia, and through Marcia for knowing all of you. And I feel it's been a group of women who have taught me how to make the transition into aging with meaning and with joy. I guess I feel that it's a wonderful gift of having all of you in my life, and the strength from our connection and the commitment to changing this world for the better. And so as long as I can stay, I will, because it's well, it's its own gift. Thank you.
Bill and we wish you a quick and easy healing from this.
Thanks.
Anybody else? From Marjorie and Tali?
Yeah, my name is Talia. I'm Jane's granddaughter, and I am.
Speak up, honey.
I'm grateful for like having the privilege of having so many elders in my life that are so like intelligent and strong and come from backgrounds of activism and really fighting for liberation, and also role models of friendship. I think that's pretty rare in our elders. And so, yeah, I think I'm grateful.
I'm Liz. I'm Talia's mother and Jane's daughter. Super happy that Jane thinks to include me, and I love it. And I would say what I'm bringing today, I'm in full on first week of in-person teaching in Oakland Unified for 2nd grade. And it has been one of the most joyous few hours of each day to see these small groups of children come in with their eyes and hearts and minds just hungry for the experience. It's a teacher's dream come true. I have only 9 children at a time, and I've been instructed that I'm only allowed to do social emotional learning for the next month and a half. So it's gratitude is not quite the right word, but it's there. And I'm the Zooming, being able to establish a relationship with these babies via a computer, and then to see them in real life. It's an experience it's just, I've never experienced this before, and neither will they. This is like a very, we're in the history in making. And so I keep telling them. And so we're writing about it a lot, and it's incredible. It's an incredible experience. So it's sort of the light in sort of this dark time of COVID. I keep telling them that this experience is so fresh and new, and no one's ever had it before, and it's special. And so we're really embracing that. And I'm tired. So it's been a very eventful week for me and the kids. So
Yeah. Thanks, Liz. Glad to have you here. Marjorie.
Gratitude for me, for sure. I sit here, and as you speak of those who came before you, for me, I'm getting a little old to always be a student and feel like the newcomer, but I still do in a way. I was once the stranger, and you let me in. And you've led the way in so many ways that I've learned so much and still do. Marcia got a little carried away, and I'm her sister now. There we are. Gratitude, yes, to have her with us. I cannot tell you the delight with which I turned around one morning and there was this twinkle in her eye again, which hadn't been there. And she looked at me and she said, I think I've got another round in me.
yes.
Welcome, Marcia, and hurrah.
Yes.
And Amy?
Yeah,
I want to say welcome, Amy.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's just a joy for me to be here. I have been at other women's Seders, but I feel like this is the matrilineal one from which it all stemmed. When I hear of its origin story, it's just wonderful. So I am grateful to be here. I'm grateful to be here through Marjorie, and I'm grateful to have gotten to meet Marcia, and I look forward to getting to know her and everybody going forward. This is one of my favorite holidays, and it's a joy to be sharing it with you.
Thank you. Thank you. So here we are, right? I think this is the perfect moment to sing Hine Mato, right?
Mm.
Well, we can. I thought that Barbara and Naomi, you could also help us because you're in the same room and you could. So let's just sing Hine Matovim Umanayim and understand that this is the joy of being in community. That's what the song really means, how good to be with each other. And since we're in a feminine group, Hine Matov Umanayim, Shevet Achot Gam Yachad. So that we're having sisters sit together rather than brothers, which is the way the song goes. So
Do we have?
you want to start that, Naomi? So Hine Matov.
Why don't you lead the singing, Jane?
Hine Matov Umanayim.
Shevet Achot Gam Yachad.
Hine Mato Umanayim, Shevet Achot Gam Yachad. Hine Mato
I think that what we can learn from this is no matter what the cacophony is, that the spirit reigns.
That's right. That's the best cacophonous group I've heard so far.
All right, time for the candle lighting and the Shehekianu. And I believe that's Jenny and Ella.
Eloheinu melech haolam, asher קידשנו במצוותיו, וציוונו יום טוב. אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. אמן.
Amen.
We've reached this day. We've reached this day. Thank you. The Seder plate, Ali and Sandy.
I go first.
Okay.
So in my earliest memories of Seders, which are sort of like in my 7 to 10 years, which was the late 60s, we were often the only Jews there, and explaining and exposing people to our traditions and how they related to the struggles of the time. So they were always fairly political Seders, but they were still pretty traditional. And as I was writing this, I remembered the Maxwell House Seders we probably all had at one point. So I was the youngest. I answered the questions. And as I got older in Seders of my own, I followed the family tradition, inviting non-Jews to the Seder. The structure remained the same. And while I had modernized the Seder and the words, the structure was pretty formal. And that's probably because I'm fairly formal when it comes to ceremony. So this is my first exposure to a non-traditional Seder. And I'm grateful to be here. So I'll do the traditional Seder plate, and my mother will do the expansion of the Seder plate. So first we have Karpas, which is the parsley signifying the first shoot of spring, renewal, growth, possibilities. We have the maror. Wait, that's the bitter herb. I feel like I should have a Vanna White. Bitter herb to remind me of the bitterness of slavery. Hazaret, which is the second bitter, which is usually horseradish, reminding us of the bitterness of enslavement. Oh, I did that. The second bitter herb is for the Hillel sandwich, but both are really to remember the bitter taste of slavery and oppression and exclusion. The shank bone is symbolic of the animals which are sacrificed. I have a beet as a reminder of the blood and sacrifice spilled in every generation in the name of freedom. The roasted hard-boiled egg is understood to represent a symbol of creation, springtime fertility, and the giving of life. And finally, we have my haroset, which is both Sephardic and Ashkenazi in nature. And it's a mixture of wine, fruit, nuts, and spices, symbolizing the mortar with which the Israelites made bricks during their time of enslavement. We have salt water representing the dish, the tears of our ancestors in enslavement, and of all those who are now enslaved by poverty and violence. And finally, we have matzah, dry, hastily made, yet like the manna, sustained us in wilderness. These are the traditional artifacts of our Seder, but as we expand and change, Judaism does as well. And Mom will identify some of those.
Okay,
Yeah.
so during the last half of the 20th century and continuing to this moment, traditional Judaism has been reforming, renewing, and reconstructing itself, finding new language, music, and forms of worship to more accurately reflect the fullness of our community. This is true of the Seder plate as well. The first edition was the orange, which has now come to represent outsiders. Lesbians, gay men, transgendered people, converts, those who lack some important skill or ability, the unlearned, all those no more belonged in the community than an orange belonged on the Seder plate. So we place an orange on the Seder plate to say all of these belong in our community. More recently, olives have been added for two reasons. The first, because for millennia, the olive branch has been the symbol of peace and our efforts to make peace where there has been war. And secondly, to acknowledge the uprooting of all the olive trees in the ongoing struggle for Palestinian autonomy and freedom. A third addition is the spoon, which is an understanding first identified by a woman named Christine Miseradino in 2003. The spoon represents the measurement of energy that chronically sick or disabled people have to carefully calibrate in order to meet their daily needs. So the spoon is an acknowledgement of those among us who are disabled, frail, or simply old, and needing to calibrate our spoonfuls. And I'm proposing this year to add 3 more. The first one is free trade chocolate. Beyond Good is sold at Whole Foods, for those of you who want to know this. It's grown under standards that prohibit the use of forced labor. This is a reminder that forced labor is still ubiquitous in our world, and the struggle for economic equality, justice, and sustainable environmental practices is an ongoing one. The next one is a banana, and the banana comes from the story of the picture that all of us have seen of the little Syrian boy who died. His body was at the edge of the ocean as the family was in their own exodus. And bananas were something that was very hard to find in the part of Syria where this family lived. And when the rest of the family made it to America, bananas were something that was used for festive occasions to mark the freedom of the part of the family that managed to make it all the way to America. So I want to incorporate this symbolic banana also to identify not only the people who are in an exodus from Syria and those parts of the world, but all the families on our southern border who are caught in their own exodus. And the last additional piece to the Seder plate I couldn't find. It's an acorn, and it is simply to acknowledge that we are gathering on what was once indigenous land. So to complete this section of the Seder service, maybe we can each take a moment to reflect on what else you might want to put on your expanding Seder plate next year, so that as we look toward the past, we honor this moment. We're also preparing for a future of liberation and freedom for all people. Amen.
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 Amen. Amen. Joan, first cup of wine.
It never ends. On this night of Pesach, thousands of years ago, a people set forth the first known step for freedom. Tonight, we celebrate that achievement and rededicate ourselves to continue to take steps to help secure freedom for all people. It's the struggle of our lifetime. We believe that each of us has the conscience, ability, and responsibility to make things better. In building a more just society, we fulfill ourselves and join closer to that which is the ultimate principle of unity within the universe. Some call it God. We raise this first cup of wine to the love of justice for all people everywhere. We pray that soon the world will be free from oppression, hunger, ignorance, fear, and war, and so much more.
We ready for Karpas? Kitty?
Karpas. The Seder traditions explore Jewish traditions by asking questions and providing answers. Excellent social science, humanities, and feminist methods. With Karpas, or green vegetables, represented here by parsley, we ask, why do we dip Karpas into salt water twice? The answers: first, we dip the green plant in salt water to remind us of the tears of Jews who were not free in Egypt, and the tears of all people today who are not free, especially women who are not free throughout our lives and in the past. Second, we dip the green plant in salt water to remind us of new life on earth in springtime, enhancing our lives and our earth with the joy of new life, especially for us, the joy of women being together and celebrating new life. So Karpas and this moment in the Seder asks us to hold these two feelings together. Sadness, deep sadness even, and joy. A ritual can help us do that better than we might think. So let's think for a moment about the sadness of the losses of the past year and the joy in the year ahead and the new life that we are seeing around us, and reflect on how we can enhance our lives by holding these two things together.
Amen.
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 We doing it? Spinach and salt. That was good.
Oh, is it me? Oh, yes. Aha. It's Marjorie. I'm up with Yachatz. Did I do that right? Yachatz.
Yeah.
So Yachatz, it's sort of interesting. In reading about this and preparing for this, I said to Amy sort of at one point that I sort of felt like sometimes I feel like Judaism and some of its traditions and even reading the Torah is like a Rorschach test. It's sort of, you reflect where you are at that time in your life, perhaps, and what you can see and not. And I see so many different interpretations. Anyway, so here's my first shot at this one. And what I found is the gist of what I found is this, that Yachatz is one essential step of the Passover Seder that is often sped through. During Yachatz, we break the middle of our 3 matzahs, take the larger of the broken halves and hide it as the afikomen, which then children search for at the end of the meal because we can't complete Seder until it's found. But I am learning that in the mystical tradition, the middle matzah symbolizes the heart. It is broken by living amid the injustices of the world and witnessing so much suffering. In life, most of the time, we are unable to focus clearly on our heartbreak. It simply hurts too much, and there is so much wrong. Instead, we cover it over and just try to move on. On Passover, as part of our freedom ritual, we reconnect with our brokenheartedness. And it's only from this connected place that we can begin to envision a perfected, righteous world. So I think that's part of it for me. And then another part is a poem, or I guess you would call it a poem, offered by Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. And I think I won't read the whole thing, but what stopped me dead about this one, and perhaps because this week also coincides with the trial of those who killed George Floyd. And I just would end with these last 2 lines, because it feels like my first really genuine heartfelt connection with that horror. And the 2 lines are this: who speaks aloud alongside those whose speech has been muted, who breathes together with those who cannot catch their breath.
Marjorie, let's just take a moment and, or I would like to take a moment and just be present with the heartbreak that we're carrying before moving on. Anybody wants to say a word or two, what that is? Thank you so much for bringing in the death of George Floyd and the trial, Marjorie. Anybody else want to say what the heartbreak is?
This whole year has been filled with heartbreak. You know, one day after another, as we saw those numbers on the screen rise, and you know, thousands and thousands and thousands dying every single day. I mean, how are we up to about 450,000 now or more? How could it not break your heart?
The heartbreak of climate catastrophe that has been put on the back burner during the pandemic, but that needs to be faced.
I think what is most heartbreaking in the current moment is the sense of hatred and violence that is ripping through parts of our society, and the loss of community in terms of, we did see community around the horror of George Floyd's death, in that there were bystanders attempting to engage. And yet we see an Asian American, a Filipino woman thrown to the ground in New York City, and no one coming to her aid. We are a fractured society, and we are, the pain is so real, I think, that we are all trying to understand and come to terms with what it would mean to heal this pain, and how we can and these divides, and how we can get back to that point of a caring society.
You know, I'm resonating a lot to what Kitty said, that idea of ritual holding the both in the end. And as much as there are many heartbreaks that could be named, there's something in the Black tradition, the Black church tradition, that's also echoed in our tradition, which is an understanding that despair and heartbreak dishonor the ancestors. And so the responsibility is to both feel the despair and the heartbreak deeply, and then take the next step to address whatever the root cause of that is. And I'm trying to hold that. And some days I'm more successful with it than others.
I'd like to say something about that. I, for one, want to say the collective holding right now, like, I don't know what you guys are feeling, but I can feel the physical pain of the heartbreak in my chest and in my rib cage right now. And it's a very physical feeling for me. And I think a lot of us hold it in our bodies as well. And so number one, for me, holding it collectively with all of you is some level of healing, I guess I could say, is happening. And I want to just echo Sandra, is that your name? Sandra Butler? Yeah. That all the while we are experiencing all of this heartbreak, one of the things that I'm really trying to do is trying to really hold the understanding that underneath, like, your deepest sorrow is also the opening for your greatest joy. And so if you can just be in it and try to get underneath it. And it just, for me, has started with, like, every day when I see somebody, anybody, I'm trying to greet people with a smile, with a hello, with even the wrinkling of my eyes so they can see through a mask that I'm bringing some level of a smile. Because it's, if I don't walk into the earth and meet the strangers with a smile first, it's like I'm stuck in that kind of like grit of the heartbreak. And I just want to offer that, because I just don't see it enough. And I just wish it's very, you treat your neighbor the way you want to be treated, but it's more than that. It's like really walking the earth and really looking at people and just loving a person that you see and trying to elicit that joy from underneath your pain, to, build on it, to build more joy and not continue the heartbreak pain. So.
We could really go on and on with this one, I think. But we have come to the time of the second cup of wine. Barbara.
Mm-hmm. So, according to one of the readings I read, we are now ready to drink the second cup of wine. That's according to what's going on here. This cup is dedicated to liberation. Liberation is not possible until we become aware of our oppression. It is said that the children of Israel had become content to stay in Egypt. Until they realized that they were slaves, they could not free themselves. It is for this reason that tonight we tell the story of our liberation. Without remembering and retelling our own story, we run the risk of forgetting the sweetness of freedom and the risk of losing our dedication to fight for the liberation of all people. I think we're in that fight now. Many of us are individually in that fight, if not individually, actively out there supporting the many people that are fighting for their lives and for their liberation. And we're there with them in our hearts and in spirit. And you know, trying to elect a government that gives them a fighting chance and things like that. So I didn't know I would be getting so emotional about all this, but I think it's important to have a broken heart so that you can go from there to the next steps. And I think good rabbis, there's many stories about rabbis that break their students' hearts so that they're open to taking the next steps in the depth of feeling all people and feeling the oneness that we all share and feeling the liberation that we all must come to at some point in our lives for our inner life as well as the outer life. So I always turn to song since I love music so much and feel it's one of the freest places for me to be in. And I believe that music frees people to a great extent. And when I saw that this was about liberation, the second cup of wine, the words that came to me were freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Janis Joplin and Bobby McGee. Now, that's really deep if you think about that. It's like you have to get to the end of your rope sometimes before you will say, no, I won't go there. I won't do this. I won't do this anymore. And we're seeing people, so many people in that spot right now. And then there's another line from Bob Dylan. How many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? And that's another part of that story. So in the words of John Lennon from the song Imagine, he says, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one. And I think that's what's going to take us there is our imagination. So during this time of being homebound and having time to think about a lot of things and being glued to the television a lot to watch the news and see everything that's happening around us that we're, you know, not flying here and there too. I just raised this glass to our own individual liberation inside, and may it shine out to all peoples who are no longer strangers, because we've all been through this and we'll keep going through it. And I think it's actually part of this life on earth, but it doesn't have to be so extreme. So here's to liberation as far as we can go with it and using our imagination to make that happen.
And I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, really sorry, but I do have to go. I can't.
Thank you for coming, Rochelle.
Yeah.
Thank you
for making the effort. We appreciate it.
and thank you for carrying forward.
Continue to take care of yourself, Rochelle.
Yeah.
I really feel that loss, don't you, of one of us leaving. So interesting on Zoom, how much you can feel.
The 4 questions, Talia and Ella. You're actually on my Zoom screen, you are side by side, the two of you, which is.
I basically have just been thinking about really the reason that we asked the 4 questions at Passover, really to engage like people who, not just children, but also people who are not Jewish or are like just not in the know about what's going on, and to retell the story to our younger generations. And I think that that idea of retelling is really important, and also the idea of questioning and needing needing help and asking your community what is going on and how do we address this. And so, and I found myself during this time having a very hard time with the question, just why? Like, why do we keep going when it feels like there is not no hope, but when things are not looking up, and it feels like such a simple question, but such an important one. And I feel as I get older, I'm almost 18, I feel younger and younger, and like I have more questions to ask my elders. And so I guess I present the question, why do we come together, and why do we keep coming together, and what's behind community? And yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I was informed by my grandmother that I would be asked a question by
That's right.
Sandy. So is that what's happening, or should I come up with the question?
Honey, your grandmother made that up. You go ahead and talk about the.
I'm extremely unprepared because I was expecting it to be the other way around, but that's okay. So, my question is, I've been talking about this a lot with my grandmother, when we're in these women's spaces and we're talking about liberation of everyone, of the world, my question for us all and for myself is, why do we not manage to bring those groups of people into our close inner circles? Because for myself, living in Israel, and being able to make Palestinian friends, even though there's an element of trust that has to be built there, which is completely understandable, I have a very hard time and have to make a conscious choice and effort to make sure that my close inner circle is not completely Ashkenazi. And it's something that I've been thinking about very recently, about how when I look at all the close inner circles that I'm in, politics and in activism, even in learning, that they're all very progressive, and that we talk about liberation and inclusivity constantly, but that we don't have that in practice, and that the majority of those circles are still predominantly white passing or white. And so my question for us is, how can we include the people that we talk about liberating and fighting for in our own close inner circles?
Good question.
Excellent questions from both of you. Thank you. Do you want to add on anything more? Any other questions rumbling around there? Yeah. Like all thousands of them.
You asked that question because it's one that your grandmother's been asking.
Yeah, we've talked about it. Yeah.
And it's so important.
It is, and it's so hard. It really is.
Yeah.
I think part of the difficulty, I'm not working in a normal job environment, but even when I did, the field I was in was particularly white and male, actually, is access. So it's like, you don't want to be the person who's like, hi, be my Black friend, but I don't encounter in my life. And so I'm not as politically involved here as I've been in other cities because of health reasons. But that was really the only place I was able to sort of access people who were outside of what was the norm of what I was living. And so, it's reaching out without, I don't think I'm explaining myself very well, but
I understand.
you don't want the person that you've reached out to feel like they're your Black friend. And I've known people who have felt that way, not necessarily with me, but with other people. So I think it's finding ways to go outside of what our normal circle is just not that easy.
I found it very interesting with Mizrahi Jews, because there's a history of oppression with Mizrahim that hasn't been addressed really at all in Israel. And the Palestinian issue, even though it's horrific, it is beginning to be addressed by Jews and Ashkenazi Jews, which is amazing and what should have happened a long time ago. But the Mizrahi issue has not been addressed, and even by the left in Israel. And so Mizrahim are undereducated and are not in the same circles that Ashkenazim and Palestinians are. And so it's a conscious effort to reach out into circles that they're in, to attempt to build friendships and bring them into closer circles. But I think there's an element of trust that has to be made between two people as well before the wider community can help. And I don't see that effort being made by Ashkenazi Jews in Israel at all, which is really disappointing considering we've got somewhere with the Palestinians.
So I want to interject something here because, like, for example, my family is also half Mizrahi Jew, and there are people here also who are different from the dominant group. And I'm feeling like we're kind of entering into this conversation as if we're all one. And I don't think that we are at all one, and that we have to be aware of the fact that that we don't open our eyes to the difference that is already here, and that we want to make sure as we speak about these things that we open up to the knowledge that we are all different and that we really don't know about each other, and that we want to be open to all of the different the differences that are among us. So I got a little worried about that because, as I said, half of my Talia is a quarter Mizrahi, for example, and so she's not part of the dominant Ashkenazi group, and so it's important to remember that also as we speak.
Yeah. I knew that about them from last time. I'm just talking about the overwhelming majority, not just in this circle, but in all other circles. But yeah, me and Talia have talked about it, and I know. Yeah, thank you.
I think that Ella's question is a really good one, and also something that can be spread outside of just what we as Jewish people have encountered in terms of either being excluded or having sects of Judaism that are exclusive in themselves. I think it can be expanded to the question of, like, what is a woman's circle, and being expansive about gender and about what being a woman means, and what like really, because we're talking about like feminine solidarity. And yeah, I've had that question just in my head too, when in women's spaces, where do trans people fit into this, because I can kind of consider myself a part of a trans experience, and I have many friends that are of trans experience and that are trans people who intentionally avoid women's spaces because they feel as though they'll be questioned or just scrutinized. And I think that this is definitely just like a conversation of not only acceptance, but expansion and intentional expansion and acknowledgement. And I think that in this circle, we do a really good job, especially with the expanding the Seder plate and things like that. But yeah, I think that's a really, really important question.
I would just offer, what's coming up for me when I'm looking at my own biases and my own experiences, is just starting to really look at my trust of other and how others are trusting of me, and what kind of energy, you're talking about expansion and inclusion. Basically, why are not groups being represented here in any spaces? And I think this factor of trust is a big one, and how we come in with our own distrusting feelings, but also how we can acknowledge and hold the other person who's coming in with distrusting feelings that are valid and that need to be held. And I think when we're expanding our groups across race, across gender, across, all of these things, it's really important to be examining our own internal biases about the other very actively and consciously, and with grace and with kindness for ourselves, because it's not always pretty what's happening inside of ourselves. And I can acknowledge that. And sometimes just being able to see it and say, we'll try to wipe it clean, because the truth is we all want expanded circles. I mean, all of these women here that I'm looking at are incredible, strong, intelligent, expanded women, but we are also all could spend that extra time sometimes going inside and acknowledging some of our own biases in the world. And why is it that we are limited? Why are we limiting what our circle looks like? Why does everything look the same? And trying to be active about it in our own personal ways. And sometimes it's not about going and actually meeting somebody and putting yourself out there, which would be wonderful. Sometimes it's as not simple, but simple. It's just sitting inside right here, just sitting with yourself and putting that mirror, like Michael Jackson said, look at the man in the mirror first, spend some time there, spend a lot of time there. Because
I think this is really at the core. I think that you really pinpointed the core of that which so many of us are struggling, and we all should be struggling with this too, and growing and learning and thinking about all this. So I thank you so much for the questions that you've raised. Really, really important questions.
And I want to say that both Ella and Tali and others in the room are working as hard as they can to make it a better world, to make it a more inclusive world. I know that's true of you, Ella, in Israel, and that's a rough place to do it.
So it's time for us to move on. We're doing great as far as time goes. So, but I do want to stay within our time. So it's Naomi's turn, who's going to do the Magid part of the Seder.
Okay, and as you all know, it's a long story, but I'm going to cut some. But Nan, you're saying we're not worried about time. Is that right?
It is almost 5:15, and we do have more to go this service,
Okay.
but you can take, yeah.
Okay, all right. The Passover story begins when the Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, starts worrying that the Jews living in Egypt will outnumber his own people. Sound familiar? We have only to look back at this past year to acknowledge that we have lived through the journey of the Passover story. We were comfortable, feeling relatively secure in American democracy. Okay, we knew that that the US wasn't perfect. We saw the inequalities and inequities in our system. But hey, it wasn't too bad. Past presidents, some more benevolent than others, gave us the impression that progress was being made. Come on, remember the 60s? But suddenly and shockingly, an immoral, power-hungry, narcissistic, frightened tyrant took power. We watched him rip holes in the system of governance we imagined indestructible. Nothing, no one seemed to be able to stop him as he and his pals grew richer and more powerful. Hatred of the other grew. Misogyny, intolerance, censorship became the norm. The president's meanness of spirit and lack of compassion encouraged the buried nastiness in some disaffected white-skinned people and gave them permission to express it in words and violent actions. Remember January 6th. We were indeed living in Mitzrayim, the narrow place, the place that squeezes the life out of human souls. No one place is always Mitzrayim, but any place can be turned into Mitzrayim. And this time, we were it. Then came the plague of plagues, COVID-19, the pandemic. It did not faze the Pharaoh in charge. He denied it was happening. It didn't change his behavior or the oppression of the people he ruled over. But the prophet Fauci guided the people into the wilderness of sequestered separation. Stay home, work at home, eat at home, don't touch or kiss or hug anyone who isn't in the same house as you. Put on masks when you go out. You can wave to the masked stranger going by 6 feet away. Don't worry, no one will feel slighted because no one will really be able to recognize anybody anyway. And while the president played golf and promised the bad flu would go away, and while some people worried about getting enough toilet paper, hundreds of thousands of our friends, mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, and interrelated fellow human beings were dying. And so we bowed to the golden calf of our commuters, and zoomed our days away. Not so bad. 2 weeks isn't forever, or 2 months, or a year. We made the best of it. we knew we weren't actually meeting real people, but boy, were we grateful for the facsimile. During that time, November rolled around with the big election. And after sitting on our bottoms for so long, people everywhere went into action. We wrote postcards and letters to the masked strangers we now recognize as versions of ourselves who suffered and loved life the way we do. We now knew this election would decide not just who ran the government, but how humanly we would be able to live. And the plague of plagues, as horrifying as it was, and still is, helped millions to realize that the king was naked and the heartless imitation of a human being was thrown off his throne. And Miss Ryan began to loosen its hold on our hearts, bodies, and souls. And once again, we breathed easier and laughed more. We knew we weren't yet in the promised land, but at least we could once again plan and work and hold the dream of making it a promising land for ourselves and for the strangers we welcome to enter into it, because we were once strangers in the land of Egypt.
Amen. Amen.
Back and forth with such intense emotions, just what I feel I need to do today. So thank you. This is a feeling of promise and possibility. And now we're at the plagues. And Marcia, you're the one who, you are the many plagued person who is doing this.
Yeah, when I was asked what part I wanted to take, that sort of popped out of my mouth, and then I said, "Oh dear, you're stuck with it." And I think that, and I have thought that it would be very easy for us to talk about, and we have already in many ways talked about the many plagues that are social, that are economic, that are geographic, that are generalized plagues in the world today, because we're living through a plague, and it's and I think for all of us, it's a brand new experience, and there probably would be a lot to talk about that way. But when I thought some more about it, I think I would like us collectively, if we can, and I hope there'll be time, to talk about our own personal plagues. What is the physical plague? What is the emotional plague? What is the social plague? What is the psychological plague that you carry with you, even when we're not in a plague year, and that is that and that we may not have recognized if we were not living through this plague year. Because I know there are many things that have come up for me that wouldn't have come up for me if we weren't in this pandemic. But the plague that I have experienced and am continuing to experience, and I really wouldn't have put it this way at any other time of the year or in my life. The plague that I carry with me is a severely damaged heart. And it has plagued me for more than 4 years now, 5 years. And and it is a plague that there is no way of talking around it. There's no way of feeling around it. It just is. And in recognizing that, I felt that there was a kind of a liberation inside of myself that I can say, okay, this is what I'm carrying around with me, and this is what I will carry around with me until I'm no longer here. So I kind of wanted to ask people to think about and talk briefly about what you consider to be your own personal plagues.
I know exactly what my plague is. I've carried it my entire life. I work on it all the time, but it's present all the time. My plague is my inability to look at my body with love and to what I see in the mirror to love it. It's very difficult for me to do that.
Thank you.
My physical plague burden, and I got lots of little ones, but the one that's bothering me the most is my shakiness. My hands are shaking a lot. And it comes at a time when I know how much strength it takes to grow old and hang in there and know that there is strength, although there are signs of shakiness and weakness.
My lifelong plague, I'd say, physically, I've not felt that I had one until this bunion came on my foot, but but my lifelong, I guess, psychological inner driver plague is one of feeling not enough, feeling not having enough, feeling not doing enough, feeling not being enough, the enough problem.
Mine is similar to that. It's too much or not enough. My whole life, it's always been that.
Unfortunately, I have to say that I have all of those plagues. So outside of that, I'd like to say that besides an aching back, which keeps me from, having joy, actually, because it becomes a chore to do almost anything, where in my life I could do most things. But I've been thinking that one of the plagues that I have that I suffer about is my privilege, because I feel like everywhere I turn, I have it easy because of my privilege, and that it sometimes blinds me to the many, 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 many people who don't have privilege in many ways. And I want to keep being aware of that as best I can, even when my back hurts.
Can relate to the looking in the mirror and loving my body. I think what the flip side of that for me is feeling like my body is out to get me. Like it just doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And I'll be like, okay. And they'll be like, I'm here, I'm still here. So it's like, everyone keeps telling me to befriend my body, but it sort of feels like trying to befriend the sort of snotty neighbor next door who doesn't really like you. And, you keep trying, but really it's, but the other thing I wanted to say, because it's so apparent here, is I have no community like you all have. And I've been extremely grateful that my mom has it when she's in a different place than me. But I think for me, it's the isolation. So.
I feel plagued by the constant demand on myself to be doing more, to somehow more engaged, even at a point where I can't do it anymore. And it's, I think it's been with me my whole life. And again, it's about holding polarity. I have that, and it has been a blessing. And right now, at the age of 91, it's something of a curse. And I'm having to really let go of some things that right at this particular time in our history and in my own history, it's very difficult to do. I mean, I have a little story. I may cry. Do you remember the day when our whole community was going to the airport because of immigration? And there was it was a very important moment. And that day, my granddaughters were here and we were supposed to go to breakfast. And I wasn't feeling well at all. So I went for my morning swim and I came home and I said, so where are we going, kids? And they said, we're not. We're going to the airport. There's this event happening and I know you're going to want to come. Well, I was not feeling well. And I burst into tears and I said, I don't think I can do it. And again, I stretched to think, well, maybe I can manage it. And they sat me down and they said, Grandma, you've been doing this your whole life. It's our turn now. You stay home, you rest. And it was so touching to me. And I've thought of it so often, how important it was for me to allow myself to not be part of whatever social justice movement was happening at that moment that was really powerful for me and calling me. So it's both a plague and a gift.
I think I think I have a physical plague and an emotional one, if not emotional, 5 or so of them. But the physical one is that I think it's because I was born so premature. There's people that don't know, this miraculous human gave birth to me at 24 weeks. And so I have a body that just falls apart on me at regular intervals. And it kind of has always done that. So in a way, that's good because I was never able to completely rely on it and then lose that. But it really plagues me. Every time it happens, I pretend it never happened before, you know, and it's, oh, yeah. So there's that. And yet at the same time, I feel unbelievably lucky to have been born a stick of butter and to be okay, right? So, yeah. I feel a bit unentitled to feel plagued by the relative smallness of that, but still it feels big for me. And I think I'm plagued by insecurity that manifests itself in different ways, and always has done since I was a kid, really. And I think I don't look at on the outside, maybe. Yeah, and that's been an ongoing thing, and it's gotten me staying in situations that were bad for me and for her for a long time. So fear and insecurity have been plagues for me, and I feel like I'm becoming more free of them. So this is a good Passover. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah.
My plague is that of a level of underlying sadness, or I would call underlying sadness, but I guess psychiatrists would call depression in my life that has existed kind of as long as I can really remember having like a proper life. And the plague is not so much the sadness, it's the fear of dipping into the sadness. The fear of letting myself go there is the plague rather than the actual depression. Yeah, so even when I'm not sad, the plague is the constant fear that if I don't do enough, it might happen again.
You know, as I've been listening to everybody, I'm remembering that every year when we come to Rosh Hashanah, I try to have a question that I take into the 10 days that I hope will frame the year. It's all very purposeful and earnest, which are two words that absolutely describe me, as those of you who know me will know. But even though from some years the questions are different, they all synthesize into the same question. And it is a question that has plagued me and continues to plague me as a question, even though the circumstances change from year to year. And the question is, how do I know and how can I trust when to keep pushing up to and beyond my edge, and when can I just release and let go? How do I know that? How do I navigate that? And that's been under every question I've had for 15 years. So right now, the specificity of it is about an aging body and a mind with more holes than it once had. And 10 years ago, it was about something else, but the question remains the same. I fear moving away from pushing myself to be my fullest. That feels dangerous and scary to me. At the same time, as someone who's going to be 83 years old in a minute, there is a certain permission that I want to be able to give myself to just let it down. Not all of it and not forever, but more than I'm able to do. So I would say that's my plague.
Good for you, Cindy. Good for you.
I want to speak. I thank Marcia for the question and all of the eloquence with which we've heard people describe plagues. I think my plague, in a way, is another way of framing a lot of what others have said, and that is the plague of separation. That how to be separate and yet also connected, and without saying too much about grandchildren who I find it hard to be separate from, but to separate from family and friends sufficiently to give the space to life growing and changing, and yet nourish my own connection. So that tension is a burden. And maybe a plague is too harsh a word for it, but sometimes it does just take over and become a plague. But the mastery of being separate but also connected is maybe John Lewis would call it good trouble.
It's so interesting how there's such similarity in the things that we're saying, because even when Marcia, when you said, you know, like, so what is what is your plague? Immediately came to my mind the whole thing that I've been doing all my life, which is a certain kind of compulsivity of just pushing and pushing to do, to be, to give, to like that. And sometimes it's just really ridiculous, because what I would really like to do, it's ridiculous. What I'd like to do is really sit and read some poetry or a book that I haven't gotten to read. And yet still, but there's this and this and this to do. And so it's like everything has to be done before I can do the pleasure settling in thing. And I do consider that to be a plague. I also like that in myself, which is kind of up for all kinds of things, like, oh yes, I can do that. I'll do that, and then I go, like, what am I doing here? So, but it's interesting. I think that, of course, if we were really to go even more with this, how much of this relates to being women and being women in this culture at this time and are living in this epoch. So it has so much to do with for me, with gender. So anyhow, who else would like? It's 5:40. We have a few more things to do. Anybody else have something they'd like to say before we wrap up the plagues?
Just a comment. I really think if you're Jewish, you suffer from to-doism.
Well, may I say one small thing before we move on? If that's true, Naomi, Marcia suffers less than any Jewish woman I know. The first time I said to Marcia, similar to what Nan just said, that I just can't allow myself to pick up a novel until 5 o'clock. And you look so confused. You just absolutely had no understanding of internalizing those kind of constraints. So Marcia doesn't fit in your schema, Naomi, that's all.
Always exceptions,
Well, shall we sing Dayenu?
Yes, let's sing Dayenu.
Okay, we got our song sheets here, right?
I'm going to start in 1 minute, but I find that this is first of all, thank you so much, Marcia, for allowing us to say these things. They're so profound and so I think intimate, actually, and create community. So thank you so much for that. And here we are in the song Dayenu, which means enough, is it enough? And it's really the essence of much of what we've been talking about. And this is very interesting, this song, because it talks about if only, God did this, it would be enough. And that brings a conditional question. Is it enough, if only? But there are other interpretations that say we use this song to understand that each gift given by God is enough. And I want to just translate that into this conversation by saying that if every one of us could think that we're enough, and I had once a teacher who tried to tell me to say, I'm perfect, which was incredibly difficult to say. And he was convinced that that's the only way we should walk around in life, because, even if at this moment we were doing something that needed to be resolved or whatever, that was perfect. But I would say to all of us here, if we, when we sing this song, can understand that we are enough in every single way because we are who we are, and we accept that, that's a wonderful way to sing this song. So here we go.
Here we go.
Ilu hotzi Lunatanu et Shabbat, Etefanu et Shabbat. The last chorus.
All right.
I
All
want
right.
to apologize for laughing, but my cats look so confused.
I think that's a wonderful way to define enough what we just did.
And I also think that I think we all agree our plagues are also our gifts. So.
This is a plague.
You guys hear that? Was that cut off? Was the
I
phone
sat
call?
on it and it stopped.
Let's move. I'm being very conscious of the time right now. And so let's move into the Motzi in the Maror. I think Jenny and Ella, you're going to just lead us through that. And then after that is a Korach with Jane and Liz. So.
Okay, so one of the unintended consequences of having this fabulous radical mother is that in my childhood and adolescence, I got incredibly attached to everything traditional and conservative. and it involved wearing very short shorts and very high heels at the same time. And so I'm just going to do this straight out thing here. And so in this hamotzi, what we do is we take, I think, because I've never actually done this, so that's a kind of thing in itself, isn't it? So we take the 3 matzot and we have the matzah on the top, on which we say the bracha, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, and then we take the middle one and we say Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzilanu al achilat matzah. And then if you have matzah in front of you, you can dip it in salt and have some. But we'll just do that. Everybody, thank you. Not in the water, darling. Actual salt. Different piece of matzah.
What? It's disgusting like this.
And you're going to do the maror?
You just did the maror.
No, I did them.
Maror.
No, I did them. Do you want me to do that? Yeah. Okay. All right. So about the maror, I think I'll say something. Because it's been interesting being in Israel for, I don't know, 6 or 8 months or something for the first time in 30 years. And there is a lot to be mal about. It's very bitter. I think what I really feel, well, on a daily basis, the things that I feel bitter about are the political situation internally and internally within Israel and in terms of the situation with the Palestinians, and just how incredibly voraciously, horrendously capitalist the place has become, just money oriented, and it's kind of like, when did that happen? And then a kind of bitterness about how rude and loud and rude and loud my people are, but not rude and loud in a kind of cool New York Jew rude, just rude and loud and and out to get you, out to get you. And so
I think she has some unresolved issues with the country that maybe hasn't really like.
I'm getting there. So there's that part of it. but there's the kind of other side of bitterness, right? Which is when we do the Hillel sandwich, it's all about that. When there's all of that, and yet I just love that place. Just love it. And I love the rude, loud, capitalist money grubbing people in it. I do. I feel about them like they are my people more than anybody else. I go into the shop and some people are yelling and I think, oh, what's going on? and so it's weird. It's like this bitterness, like, oh my God, what happened to us, especially coming from, New Zealand and things, which is like the opposite. And then the other piece of it is a real realization that the whole country suffers from post-traumatic stress. Right? And it actually does. Yes. Like that if you make a loud noise, everybody jumps, right? It's like a nervous system affliction. It's a brain change, and it just gets passed on from generation to generation. And that's the soup that everybody grows up in. And so I also have a lot of compassion for the things that make, for these bitter people, really, who are somehow mine and wonderful at the same time. Anyway, so now, Marol. So we're going to say this, and then somebody help me, but I think we just eat Marol on matzah if we do it, and then after that we do the korech. Okay. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו וציוונו על אכילת מרור. Now if you want to and you have bits in front of you that are
horseradish, have horseradish. If not, use mustard.
Right. So we're at the korech.
No.
Yes, they are
Yes.
at the korech.
Oh, we
Yeah,
are.
but that's not us.
Oh,
And I
right.
believe that, if I'm not mistaken, that there's no blessing over the Hillel sandwich, if I'm not mistaken. But whatever it is, I want to talk a little bit and then Liz will talk. And that is that, putting two things together, like the bitter and the sweet, is something that often can lead to a reality that's greater than either one of the two things. And I'm very interested in difference in that respect. And I'm just going to do one thing on the piano, 1 minute, which is going to be. And you can hear that the dissonance of the music resolves to something more than the dissonance. And I've always been fascinated by bringing together two things that are so different. And then in the end, like in the dialectic, that then you could resolve them into something that you didn't know existed before. And it's the same thing as like you taste the maror. And, Jenny and Ella, I understand why you're living in Israel. And Marcia, we often talk about this. We hate what's going on, and I love the country more than my heart. I don't even know how to understand that. Just like I don't understand, the conflict between the bitter and the sweet. But I do know that when we eat the Hillel sandwich, which I don't happen to have here, other people do, that the taste of the two things together creates a reality that's more than either one of them together. So that's what I want to say about it. I don't know, Liz, what you want to do.
I think I've already kind of spoken on this, and it's something that's very active in my life. And that is, it is only with that bitter bite that we can even understand what sweet is. You don't know sweet unless you know bitter. You just don't. And so the darkness of life and the hardships of life are really our windows and doorways into our deepest abilities to have joy and sweetness in our world. And the more we can focus on those sweet places, because they're always there, even in the darkest moments, that we will continue to build on a feeling of positivity and growth and goodness. And the two together are perfect, because you really couldn't have a life only with joy. Like, what fun is that? The whole art.
None of us know. None of us know.
Well, none of us. I don't think we really want to know as much as we think we actually, what I'm learning is that through all the trauma I've experienced in my life and the generational trauma that comes with me and the generational trauma of our African-American sisters and brothers and the years of trauma in the Jewish community and in the Palestinian communities and all of our communities around the world. All of that trauma is informing and evolving us, because it's without that trauma, we cannot see. And it's like the lotus. The lotus is deep down in the mud and it's fighting for light. And so it's just coming out of darkness. And that's when you are enlightened, when you can come from the dark places and go towards the light. It's a gift, actually. I was going to say, I don't know if you heard me, but I actually was saying, I think we all understand our plagues, our personal plagues are actually our gifts. They is a blessing that you have these to struggle with and to grow from and to share with your young children, and so that they can share in your evolution. And I can hear from the elders their evolution, and I can build from that. So all of those struggles and pains and bitters, having that sweetness inside of here is what we look for in the bite. It's like the horseradish takes over your mouth and then something happens and that sweetness just takes it all away.
It's the important context.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, such a good way of saying it. I'm looking at the time. We're at our third cup of wine. Jan is doing that.
I'm going to preface this by saying that I am in the process of running out of battery on this device. And so I may not be able to stay with you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Am I still transmitting?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to say very quickly that the third cup of wine, which usually follows a lot of the meal and all of the other activities and singing and activities. And so people by this time have blessed the first and second cup and are blessing the third cup. Also is the time at which we turn to fill Elijah's cup and to open the door and anticipate the prophet Elijah coming through the door. And we have also at this time, in my own experience, designated that there would be a cup on the table for Miriam, who is like our very own Marcia, a leader through the Red Sea, the Reed Sea, through the open waters, planting the seeds wherever we go, to be singing and moving forward and pushing those guys and everybody else to get a move on, because we have got to get to the other side. So I'm going to try and switch my camera to show you Elijah's cup and Miriam's cup. And here we go. And you can see my dogs as well. Here's Elijah's cup and Miriam's cup. Elijah has the wine, Miriam has the water. Miriam's got it all over Elijah in terms of just being ready and prepared to give us life and health and good spirit. And she brought us Moses, who then she let pretend to be the leader while she was the one who really moved everybody forward. So Miriam brought us water and wellness and health. And so we raise a cup to Miriam and we remember the beauty of both the third cup and the water that we drink.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
I'll never be
And
able
my,
to
and my
think of,
feed lasted. So there we go.
I'll never be able to think of Miriam's cup again without seeing Marcia's face.
That's it. That's
it. And we have a fourth cup of wine.
Yes.
Sandy, you want to do
Yeah,
anything?
the fourth cup.
Oops.
There you go.
The task of liberation is long and requires us to recommit to the struggle in every moment, to adding our voices, to bringing our personal histories to the work of feeding the pharaohs of this moment. We drink to the long haul, to all that must be done now to build a world of freedom. We sip from our fourth and final cup, imagining the sweet liquid as a taste of a redeemed world where all of our daughters and of our sons, be they biological children, adopted children, or spiritual heirs, are free to be fully and completely themselves, celebrated for who they are and what they accomplish, able to give of themselves generously to our world. Amen.
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 Naomi, you have a poem for us.
Yes, by Joy Harjo, our poet laureate, or was. The world begins at the kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of earth are brought and prepared, set on the table. So it has been since creation, and it will go on. We chase chickens or dogs away from it. Babies tease at the corners. They scrape their knees under it. It is here that children are given instructions in what it means to be human. We make men at it. We make women. At this table, we gossip, recall enemies, and the ghosts of lovers. Our dreams drink coffee with us as they put their arms around our children. They laugh with us at our poor falling down selves. And as we put ourselves back together once again at the table. This table has been a house in the rain, an umbrella in the sun. Wars have begun and ended at this table. It is a place to hide in the shadow of terror, a place to celebrate the terrible victory. We have given birth on this table and prepared our parents for burial here. At this table, we sing with joy, with sorrow. We pray of suffering and remorse. We give thanks. Perhaps the world will end here at the kitchen table, at the Seder table, while we are laughing and crying, eating of the last sweet bite.
Next year, may we all live in a world of peace. L'shana haba'ah be'olam be'shalom. A year of good fortune. Santil Chadra. And in the tradition of our work for social justice, Tzedek Tirdaf. Justice, justice shall we pursue. Amen.
Amen.
End of our Seder. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Nan.
Thank you for doing this, everybody.
Thank you.
Can I add one little thing? Marcia, thank you for giving us the opportunity for all of us to love you at one time.
It's good for the heart.
Yeah.
But really, I want to thank Nan and Sandy and Naomi for stepping up because I really couldn't do that this year, and said, would you like to have a women's Seder? And they said, we'll put it together. And you did. And I thank you both so much. And I thank you all for being here. It's hugely meaningful to me personally, but I also know collectively. And Shana Ba.
Yes.
Thank you for being here, Marcia.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
to have your daughter and your granddaughter here is
Yeah.
What a delight.
to see you in the
Next
street.
year
All
at
of you,
Marcia's.
wonderful to see each and every one.
There it is.
Barbara, why don't you
Bye.
jump
Bye.
out?
Bye.
Bye-bye, drumming out.
Now I can get your mail.
Nan, would you be able to send us the recording?
Check the mailbox and change my slacks.
I think it's
And
Marjorie, did you?
Whoops.
Somebody recorded, yes.
power outages.
Oh, that's good. Oh, I see.
Hi, everybody.
You.
All right.
Hi, Goyles.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Okay.